Hi. Had some issues with the curtain. I don't know if you saw that. Not part of the talk. I'm so excited to be here this evening. I'm going to be talking to you about Black women in science, and very specifically, how Black women, typically in particular, Black slave women, were used as experiments, science experiments, in a sense, guinea pigs, for some very famous and well-known scientists and doctors. In general, though, just to give you a context, experimenting on Black slaves was very popular. It was the norm. Not to say that everyone was for it, but it was done quite a bit. For example, Thomas Jefferson experimented on his slaves because he wanted to prove that vaccination was better than inoculation. So he did this by experimenting on 200 of his slaves, his son's slaves, and his neighbor's slaves. And then after he found out that the vaccination didn't kill anybody, he then gave the vaccination to his white family in Monticello. And then specifically, though, with gynecology, Black slave women were used, and that's what I'm gonna focus on mainly this evening. From my research, what I found is that gynecology was almost built on the backs of Black slave women, and I guess maybe not their backs. The vaginal area of Black slave women, it's pretty remarkable. For example, cesarean sections were practiced and the surgeries on Black slave women before they were put on white slave women. Different topic. Before cesarean sections were done on white women, they were practiced on Black slave women. And then surgery to remove ovarian tumors, they were also done on Black slave women. But what I'm gonna focus on is Dr. James Marion Sims, who I feel like I'm gonna go ahead and say it was the king of practicing on Black slave women. For those of you who don't know who he is, he pioneered the vaginal fistula surgery. So a vaginal fistula will happen when a woman has a challenging birth. And because of that birth, there will be a tear in her vagina to her bladder and then sometimes even her rectum. And so when that happens, there would be constant pain and leakage. And this was very prevalent in the 18th century and the 19th century. And James Marion Sims knew that if he could figure out a way to fix this, he would become very famous and very rich. And that's exactly what he did. And he did this by acquiring 11 Black female slaves. So he started his experimentation in 1845. And what he would do is experiment on these women. He didn't use anesthesia, and he also did not have their consent. And just to be clear, anesthesia existed. There was anesthesia available, but he didn't use it for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons he didn't use it is because of the belief that he felt that Black people did not feel pain in the same way that white people do, and also because he felt that the surgery wasn't going to be that painful. What's interesting about that, though, is that in his accounts of the surgery, he would sometimes acknowledge the pain of the women. So we know the names of 3 of those women: Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha. When he was writing about Lucy, she was 18 years old, an 18-year-old Black slave. He wrote, "Lucy's agony was extreme. I thought she was going to die. It took Lucy 2 to 3 months to recover entirely from the effects of the operation." With Anarcha, she was 17 years old when he started his surgeries on her. He did 30 surgeries on Anarcha before he was able to perfect the surgery. And again, no anesthesia, and the surgeries happened over a 4-year period of time. And I want to set the tone for you. When gynecology started, there was this, it was almost like a Victorian time. So whenever a male gynecologist was working on a woman, on a white woman, he wouldn't be looking directly at the vagina. He would sort of be looking away. She would be lightly clothed. He would almost be kind of like feeling around the area to figure out what was going on. But those types of, like that type of decorum was not used on these black slave women. He made them completely take off all of their clothes, get down on all fours, and look directly into their vagina. And he would also bring in other white male doctors as well to look at them and examine them, because again, a black woman was treated differently than the white woman. The other significant point about this is that after James became famous and he kind of moved up north and garnered notoriety, he sort of hid the fact that he did these tests on black women. And he did this by taking out the race in the articles that he would write about it. And he also would have illustrators paint pictures of like white women in these articles to make it seem like the tests were done on the white women when they were not. There's statues of James Marion Sims in a lot of places. One in particular is in Central Park. And the statue set reads surgeon and philanthropist. And as I was doing this research, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about whether or not this statue needs to be taken down, but I feel that if we keep it up, it needs to be accurate. So maybe not just surgeon and philanthropist, but like surgeon, philanthropist, and sadist, because that's what he seems like to me. The point, another point that I found astounding was I remember when I was reading that he felt that black people didn't feel pain the same way as white people. And I thought, well, this is crazy. Like, this must be something that only people thought back in the 18th or 19th century. But that's actually not true. As I was doing more research, I found so many articles that were done that showed that black Americans are actually systematically undertreated for pain relative to white people. And there have been studies done about why this is happening. I ran across a study that was done at UVA, and I'm from Virginia, so I was like, oh, this is interesting. What did they find? So in this study, they isolated white people who had no medical training, and then white people who did have medical training, white people who were med students, and then white people who were residents. And they asked them about a set of 10 questions about black people. And they were asking them to say, is this true? Is this false? The question that stood out to me was, black skin is thicker than white skin. Is that true or is it false? 58% of the white people who had no medical training thought that that was true. 40 to 42% of the white people who were first and second year medical students thought that that was true. And 25% of the white medical students who were residents thought it was true. And I remember being astounded by this because it's not true. And I want to take this opportunity to clear it up. As a black woman with black skin, we do feel pain, just like white people do. It's funny, I'm like, okay, I know you guys probably see us on the news a lot, getting beat up by the cops and shot, and you must think, we must not feel pain because they keep going outside, but we do. We do, in fact, feel pain. And I think it's part of the responsibility of people in medicine to kind of learn about their biases, which is part of why I'm excited that all of this learning is happening, and at the same time saddened by it. I want to point out a couple of books in case any of you are interested in doing some more learning about this yourself. It's a book called Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, and she kind of goes into great detail and depth about the surgeries that were done all through history. And then I also want to shout out the UVA study that was published in April of 2016 in the National Academy of Sciences, because that also kind of details it. And again, the study came out in 2016, so this is a very recent study. And I want to end by talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was a civil rights activist and like voting like rebel. She died a year before I was born in 1977, and she was this incredible woman, but she had an experience where she went to the hospital to have a fibroid tumor removed. It was benign. But while she was in the hospital, her white male doctor also decided, of his own volition, to remove her uterus without her permission, and thereby sterilizing her. And that's one of the acts that sort of spawned her to go into civil rights work. And she said, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." And I just love that quote because I feel like it unites us. And the other quote I want to leave you with is from India Ari, who's a Black female singer-songwriter. And the quote is, "I am not my hair, I am not my skin, I am the soul that lives within." And what I love about that quote is, particularly as a Black woman, but I think everybody has this experience of being invaded, being assaulted, and particularly as a Black woman, just historically, that's been happening. But no matter what is done to our body, we still have our soul. And that inspires me as we continue to have change and healing in our society. Thank you.